Hello. Today we're going to be learning about life's molecules, those four super important molecules that all living things, plants, fungi, animals, and humans like you and I, need to grow, to rebuild our cells, and to reproduce. So if you look here, I have a diagram of some food. Hopefully what you're eating looks as healthy as this, right? And it's not just pizza and chicken nuggets and french fries, because that's what your body will be made of if that's what you're eating. But as we eat these foods, what our body does is we're breaking down those large molecules inside these foods to the smallest building blocks of those molecules, and that's what our cells are using to rebuild tissues, to make new cells, to grow, right? So it's really important that we're getting those four biomolecules that we're going to be talking about today so that those cells can function properly and we can grow properly. Okay, so macromolecules or biomolecules, as we can refer to them. Macro means big, large, right? So these are large molecules that we're talking about. And macromolecules are many atoms bonded together to make a large molecule that is important for living things. So we'll be talking about protein, carbohydrates, lipids or fats, and nucleic acids. Those are the four essential biomolecules for living things. Now, before we start looking at each of those molecules, it's important to recognize that they all share a common structural component, which is carbon in their structures. So if you see here, remember we learned how to draw these electron configurations. Carbon has an atomic number of 6, so that means it has 6 electrons, 2 in the inner orbital and 4 in the second orbital. So these 4 outermost electrons, these are called the valence electrons, and these are the electrons that are available for bonding. We also know that this orbital can hold up to 8 electrons, which is when the atom would be most stable. So carbon is a special molecule because it can form up to 4 bonds with other atoms. So it loves bonding, which is why carbon is so essential in all of these molecules, because it's able to form so many bonds. All right, so before we get started on the macromolecules, a few important terms that we need to go over. Monomer and polymer. Monomer is the smallest unit of a molecule, so the single building block of a molecule. The prefix mono means one. Okay, so this is one single unit of something, right? If you're thinking of the alphabet, a monomer is just one letter. A polymer is when we put a bunch of those letters together to make words. So a monomer is one single letter. The polymer would be the word. Poly means many. So a polymer is a large molecule made up of many monomers. Okay, so we can see here this is one monomer, and when we put a bunch of those monomers together, we get a polymer, or the larger molecule. Okay, so as you're taking notes, I would suggest that you create something like this in your notebook, maybe even on a double page spread rather than taking notes all down the paper. A table like this might really help you organize your thoughts, because for each of these macromolecules, we'll be going over the monomers, polymers, function of that molecule, so why does our body need it, some examples that you'll see often in class, the elements that are in each one, and you're going to be able to draw the diagrams because you're going to need to be familiar with what the structure of each of these macromolecules looks like. Okay, so we are going to start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are some of my personal favorite foods, right? Things like bread, pasta, all that good sugary stuff. The monomer of carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. Remember, mono means one, saccharide means sugar, so this is one sugar molecule. Some examples of monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, and galactose. This is what that structure looks like. Anytime you see this ring structure like this, we're talking about carbohydrates. This is a glucose structure. And the polymer of carbohydrates is called a polysaccharide. Kind of easy to remember because they have the words mono and poly right in there. Again, saccharide is sugar, poly is many. So this is many sugars. Starch and cellulose are examples that we're going to look at frequently in this class. And you can see we've got many of these single monomers bonded together to form the polysaccharide. Important function of carbohydrates is that it provides energy for cellular processes. Everything that our cells do is powered by energy from carbohydrates. Okay, so we need carbohydrates. They're the energy that our cells rely on for movement, for organ function, for fighting infections, for cell division to make new cells, for digestion, for thinking, all that important stuff that our cells do. We need carbohydrates to supply that energy through cellular respiration, which we'll be learning about shortly. The structure of the molecule is here. I would definitely draw this in your notes. It's a structure that you're going to need to get familiar with. And each of these is representing one element, right? So this is an atom of carbon, atom of oxygen, carbon, carbon, carbon. So if we were going to write the chemical formula for this molecule, what you do is you count each of the atoms and then write them. So let me move my face here. So we've got 6 carbons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 hydrogens. You count this one as 2 because it has a 2 next to it, and 6 oxygens. So the chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6. Some examples of delicious carbohydrates are seen in this picture. Some of my favorite things. Cellulose, starch, chitin, which is in plant cell walls, fructose, glucose, all those delicious sugary things. All right, next we're going to talk about lipids. The monomer of lipids, there's 2 of them. Glycerol, which is the top of this lipid molecule, and the fatty acids, which are these long pieces that hang down from the glycerol molecule. Okay, so one of these is a monomer of lipids. And lipids is another word for fat. Also delicious. All right, so the polymer of lipid, there's really no fancy names of it. You can just call it fat, lipid, oil, wax. Any of those things works. There's no fancy name for it. Lipids have a lot of really important functions. A few of them, they store energy for times when we don't have any immediately, right? So the carbohydrates are quick energy. We eat them, our cells can use it right away. But lipids, our body can store them so that at a time where we don't have any food available, right? We're not eating every second of the day, and sometimes there might not be food available. Our body can use the fat stores that we have to break those fat molecules down and use that for energy. So really important. Warmth is another one I didn't write down, but right, so animals like this walrus, the reason he can survive swimming in the Arctic freezing waters is because he's got a lot of blubber, a lot of fat that insulates him and keeps him warm. Cellular protection. All of our cells, all trillions of them, have a membrane, a cell membrane that surrounds them that is made of lipids. So it's really important that we're getting lipids in our diet so that when we're making new cells, they have fully functioning membranes. Okay, so fats, I know a lot of people hear like, oh, fats are bad. Too much fat is bad, but we need some fats, right? We can focus on healthy fats like avocados and olive oils and things like that, but we do need fats. So some examples we can see here. Cholesterol, triglycerides, phospholipids are the lipids that make up our cell membranes, right? If we're thinking about foods, oils, butter, lard, all those things are fats. Now some important examples here. Where can I move my face so you can see everything? 2 important types of lipids that we'll be looking at are saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Saturated means that the carbons are saturated with hydrogens. So essentially, if you look at this structure here of the fatty acid tails, They're straight. They're in a straight line. They're all single bonds, so it's a straight line. So these fats are solid at room temperature. So those fatty acid tails, when you stack them, right, it makes them solid at room temperature. So these are fats that are less healthy for us, like butter and lard, right? If you think about when you eat these fats, you get broken down and go into your blood, right? You don't really want a solid in your blood, right? You want your blood to be liquid. So these unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature because they are bent. These structures here are bent because there's a double bond here between two of the carbons in the chain. So when they're bent, they're harder to stack on top of each other, and that's what makes them liquid at room temperature, which makes them healthy for us. Now we're going to be looking at proteins, another super important macromolecule. The monomer is called amino acids. So one single circle here is an amino acid. And when we put many amino acids together, you can call it a protein or a polypeptide. Peptide's another word for protein. Poly means many, so a polypeptide. There are there are 20 different amino acids that are found in nature. The structure of them is here, so definitely draw this in your notes. We've got a central carbon, an amino group, a hydrogen, and a carboxyl group. This R group is at the bottom is what changes depending on what type of amino acid we have. These parts up top always stay the same. The bottom part can change. Okay, so these are a bunch of different amino acids that are found in nature, and we'll be learning about these as we go on. But you can see colored in blue here, all of these are the different side chains, the R groups at the bottom, which is what causes those structural differences. Function, super important. Proteins are not for energy. A lot of people think this. They're not energy. They provide the structure, function, and regulation of tissue and organs. So if carbohydrates are the energy, like the gas you put into the car, the protein is the structures of the car. So the parts of the car. What everything is made of is the protein. So we've got a hemoglobin molecule here, an insulin molecule. These are all examples of important proteins inside of our bodies. Some more examples, enzymes, which we'll be learning about soon, which speed up the chemical reactions inside of our bodies. Structural proteins, bones, muscles, all that good stuff. Hormones, which help our body function. Receptors that are on cells, which help cells communicate. And antibodies, which help us fight infections. All right, so if we look again at the structure, we've got all the different elements that are found, sometimes S, depending on sulfur, depending on the side chain. Nucleic acids, now we're moving on. Nucleic acids, the monomer is a nucleotide, and here we're referring to DNA, right? DNA and RNA. So if you see the prefix nuc, these are found in the nucleus of the cell. I'm sure you've learned about that before. So all of these words have similar prefixes to kind of help you remember. Definitely draw this structure in your notes. The polymers are just RNA and DNA, which are also the examples. And these have another really important function. Store and transfer genetic information, right? So we can make new cells, so we can reproduce and make offspring with similar genetics to us, and instructions for making proteins. Every time our body makes new proteins, we get the instructions for making those proteins from the DNA. So some examples, like I said, RNA, DNA, even ATP, that energy molecule, are nucleic acids. Okay, so if you ended up making a table in your notes, it should probably look something like this. So I'm sorry, the words are kind of cut off here, but this is kind of summary of everything that we just talked about. And having all of this in your notes is going to be really important for all of the activities that we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks. If you have any questions, let me know. See you next time.